Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to our global audience, and welcome to the Asia-Scotland Institute's webinar today, UK-India Relations, Transformation, Not Evolution. My name is Rick Mincham, the Asia-Scotland Institute's Head of Development, and I'll be moderating this discussion today. This is a timely event, given the ongoing discussions between our respective governments to revitalise UK-India relations under the UK-India 2030 vision, a key component of which is the enhanced trade partnership, which aims to double bilateral trade between the two nations. From the UK point of view, it is a significant opportunity to tap into India's $2.6 trillion economy and market of 1.4 billion consumers. Before we get started, I would like to highlight that the 14-week consultation period where the UK government is welcoming views from the business community and the community at large on the content of the trade deal will end on August 31st, so I would encourage our members to take advantage of this opportunity. We are planning another event on this important topic in a month's time, so we will keep you posted on that. With that said, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, British High Commissioner to India, Mr. Alex Ellis, CMG, a role he has taken this year. Prior to this posting, Mr. Ellis was Deputy National Security Advisor to the Cabinet Office, Director General of the Department for Exiting the European Union, and has held a number of varied roles in the Foreign Commonwealth Office across South America and Europe. Also joining the Asia-Scotland Institute for this discussion with Mr. Ellis is, in my view, one of the best examples of India-Scotland relations, entrepreneurship and philanthropy, Poonam Gupta OBE, founder of PG Paper and winner of Ernst & Young's UK Entrepreneur of the Year Award in 2019. Born in Delhi, Poonam has subsequently made Scotland her home while establishing her business in over 60 markets globally, many across Asia. She is passionate about supporting Scotland's engagement with Asia and India in particular. I would encourage the audience to look into her and many of her varied activities and support where possible. Also joining us with the Asia-Scotland Institute team today, we have our chairman, Roddy Gower. I'm looking forward to what will be a very interesting discussion. So to get proceedings started, I'd now like to hand the room over to Roddy.
Thank you, Rick, very much. And a big thank you to the High Commissioner for giving up time today to meet with us. And you will know that we're probably now the major force in Scotland, educating and informing people about developments in Pan-Asia, within which, of course, India and her role is hugely important. The proposed visit of the Prime Minister had to be cancelled for COVID and other reasons, although there have been meetings since with members of the Indian government. And I wonder if we could start off by my asking you what has been achieved or what it was hoped would be achieved by that visit, and what your own mission is during your tenure as High Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Roddy, and thank you very much to the Institute as well. I can only welcome, and thank you to all those who've joined us today. Any institution which is educating the United Kingdom about Asia has got to be welcome because I think we need it. And there's a lot we have to learn about that part of the world, and I certainly speak for myself as part of needing that. So the Prime Minister didn't come because of COVID, but they did. The Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi ji did have a virtual summit at the beginning of early May. And that did fix a 10-year roadmap, which is a public document, which is really the kind of core of what we are trying to do. I won't read it out. It's quite long, and we've now got to get on with the doing of it. But I would say you had the very clear message from Prime Minister to me, which is transformation or evolution, which is the title of the talk. I think that's happening because of several reasons, but partly, I mean, some of them are about, and I was listening this morning actually to Amal Rajan and Sundar Pichai, the head of Google, in Amal Rajan interviewing him. And, Amal Rajan said the world is changing enormously because essentially of Asia, technology, and the relationship with humans with nature. India is fundamental to all three of those. So we are tasked really to get on with the transformation through trade and investment. And thank you very much, Rick, for mentioning the consultation exercise for the free trade agreement. That is very important. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, as we talk through it. through health for obvious reasons, but I think going beyond COVID actually, in terms of the transformation of healthcare in our two countries. Through defense and security, which to my mind is one of the absolute golden keys to unlocking a different kind of relationship. The UK has a relationship with India, has for a very long time, but I think that's a different approach to defense and security is going to be fundamental. Climate change, with the COP in Glasgow, of course, later this year. Again, that's a huge event, but that's also a much longer term challenge. And finally, the kind of the bridge, the flow of people between the two places, which is so extraordinary, temporarily made much more complicated by COVID, but fundamental. I mean, I don't think it's just with people come ideas, knowledge, and that is fundamental to making this relationship work. So very broadly, I'd say those were the 5 big axes behind the clear command to transform rather than evolve.
We've had the pleasure of talking to some of your predecessors, and I wonder amongst the topics that you've mentioned, which you would classify as the most urgent. I'm slightly minded by what's going on in Afghanistan when you talk about defense.
Yes.
And India and Afghanistan historically have obviously been linked, as we both know.
Yeah. So I spoke a lot to my predecessors before I came here. And one thing I take away from speaking to them is I think quite a lot of what I'm really doing for my successor's successor. Yeah. This is a slow burn. It's a decade-long thing. It's a roadmap out to 2030. Secondly, we've been here before, yeah. David Cameron came bouncing out in 2011. We're going to transform this relationship. So why should it be different? I would say, and I'm thinking about Dominic Asquith here, my main predecessor, who I'm lucky with my timing. I worked on Brexit after 2016 referendum, and that was really taking up all of the oxygen of the government at the time, and Parliament and public debate. And there really wasn't a lot of attention going to some other things. And so I'm very lucky that now Brexit, the negotiations have been completed. Now you're about the implementation of those agreements, and the government is looking outwards and using the new powers which it has, whether it's on trade or on migration policy. It might be much undersold changes in migration policy in the UK. So I'm lucky in my timing. The two leaders get on. I think that's very clear. Even over the ether, that the Prime Minister Modi sees in Prime Minister Johnson somebody you can do business with. And our Prime Minister has made very clear to me how interested he is in India and how much it's central part of his policy. And he said it as much when he addressed the Foreign Office Ambassadors Conference a couple of weeks ago. He was very clear India is top of the list in terms of priorities. So, and also events. A combination, I would say, of Chinese pressure on India, the fact that every country in the world is wondering what do we do with China. COVID, I think, has accelerated actually the relationship between the two countries. They are making us think in a different way. So I think we'll see, but to steal a good Indian expression, it is an auspicious time to be taking on this job.
Good, thanks. Talking of auspicious times, it's very auspicious that we have Poonam Gupta on the call with us. She's a very distinguished businesswoman, as you will know, and done a great deal in India and with the Indian community. Poonam, would you like to ask the High Commissioner some questions?
Very nice to meet you. I have had chance to meet Mr. Dominic Asquith as well. 3 years ago, when I took a delegation to India, it was a Chambers delegation, which went from Scotland to India. UK and India, we have a long history together. Culture, business, economy, finance, everything, we are intertwined. And UK has always played an important role in Indian economy. And I'd like to say vice versa, considering that India has huge investments in the UK. But generally what I see, and something that, I feel, how do we transform this, is most of these investments tend to stop south of border. When we talk about the UK, India stops mainly with England. That's maybe because of huge Indian community in England. Can we do more to make Scotland more part of this UK-India collaboration? And what can we do more? Something I've been trying really hard for last 3 or 4 years.
I suspect you can answer that question better than I can, but let me have a go. I mean, you have a deep history of Scotland and India. So my mother's Scottish, from Kirkintilloch. My grandfather served in the army here for about a decade, in one of the Punjabi regiments, and actually retained an enormous affection for India for the rest of his life. So there's a kind of history there. There are some pretty chunky investments, if I remember rightly, from India into Scotland. I know the Pyrmouths have some facilities at Grangemouth. I think Wypra have investments in Scotland as well. So there's a fairly chunky amount of investment there as well. There are obviously the kind of famous products, which is obviously the main one. Still a much valued product in India. So I think you've definitely got something to build on there. I think it's partly about making the UK attractive, and then through Scotland, seeing what are the areas which are going to be of most interest to Scotland. One area, and I know from previous experience, Scotland's very strong in some aspects of defence technology. You have some very, very high-end companies based in the Central Belt, if I'm not mistaken, on defence technology. And what I do, going back to your question, I think that we could do a lot better in sharing defence and security technology between the two countries. That is something which we haven't done that much of over the last 10 to 15 years. And I'm sure we'll come on to defence a bit more, but we've actually got just coming to Indian waters now, the Carrier Strike Group led by Queen Elizabeth, of course, made in Scotland mainly, and surrounding ships. So I think that would be an area. I think any more Bollywood films, which could be shot in Scotland. I was saying, to my amazement, when I was on holiday in the Lake of Menteith a couple of weeks ago, I discovered it was the venue for the opening sequence, I think, of Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, which is a huge film in India in the 1990s. Don't worry, I won't sing the title sequence. So I think there's a kind of cultural bit of it as well. I'm wondering, I don't know if there is, but we have the 75th anniversary of Indian independence next year. It's also the 75th anniversary of the Edinburgh Festival, if I'm not mistaken, and whether one can play around with that a bit. And indeed, the other thing on the cultural side is you have some great cultural institutions in Scotland, some of which have quite, in Glasgow, for example, if I'm not mistaken, which have connections with India. I also think that's another way which can really resonate in India. So I'd be using your full range of different tools to try to drive that attraction, but hopefully a transformation of the UK's relationship with India should be of benefit to Scotland as it should be to Northern Ireland, to England and to Wales. So I hope that will also help all of us.
Following your lead on addressal, so with Modi ji, so Mr. Alice ji, my next question is FTA agreement between India and the UK. It's been hugely celebrated by both the British, companies and community here, as well as the Indian community. And there are huge hopes that this FTA will play a major role in recovering, British and Indian economies together, and not just recovering from these last 2 years of pandemic, but also, creating a stronger future where, together between the two countries. How do you see, so I mean, as a business, I feel that, even though last 2 years were hard, the government here in the UK has thrown multiple lifelines, one after the other, to businesses in various different forms. And we have benefited from that. It has helped us survive, some of the toughest time. Yes, some industries were hit harder than the others. But, whether it was the furlough scheme, I can name so many of them, which are still on the go. That's definitely helped us. Your experience being in India now, how do you see that? Of course, I know that Indian government has also provided multiple supports, in various ways to SMEs, smaller business, farmers, agriculture in areas. How do you see it from your point of view, being there now for a while?
I have been here for a while, been 6 months. I think it takes roughly 9 lives to begin to understand India. So I have to be modest in how much I know. But First of all, thank you very much for the recognition of what the British government has done on support during COVID, because I think that has been a big challenge for everybody. The FTA is a great opportunity, I think. It's a kind of new departure for the UK. Of course, we haven't had an independent trade policy since 1973. What we've done since getting it back in 2016 is mainly, and I was involved with it in my last job in the Textile on Brexit, was to convert the existing EU agreements into UK agreements, and that's been broadly done. And now we're kind of launching onto the next stage, which is okay, right? What about the new ones? In Australia, obviously, there's some news on that. India is kind of new departure. There wasn't an EU-India trade agreement. This is not a kind of advanced economy. It's quite a different kind of economy. It's an enormous economy in a completely different stage of development from the kind of, your Canadas or your Koreas and so forth. So this is actually quite interesting from a UK policy point of view. What are we trying to do? What's interesting to me is how enthusiastic the Indian side is about it. They see great potential, actually, and part of what they see as a potential in the UK relationship as an independent country is on trade. And we've had some initial small steps, whether it's on palm fruit. So I'm looking forward to serving apple pie to anyone who comes to the residence in Delhi. I think it'll be a tough negotiation, although the economies are they're quite a good fit together in some ways. Their needs are slightly different. Actually, that may help in terms of an FTA negotiation. It isn't quite so zero sum. I also think it's important not to lose sight of the things you can do along the way. You don't pin everything just on the FTA. And that can include some liberalization, some aspects of services, recognition of qualifications. There's a series of steps which I'd like us to take along the way. And I hope very much that it's an agreement which can benefit India, obviously the UK, but also India, which is itself obviously coming out of a big economic shock from COVID, like the UK, like economies all over the world. And I think it's the Indian government in its budgets earlier this year, soon after I arrived, really went for growth and prioritized growth. And I think that must be right. And taken further liberalizing measures to try and help the private sector to be able to deliver that growth. And you get the feeling, just talking to the Modi government, of the importance it gives to the private sector and to entrepreneurship and to the possibilities which exist, hopefully for UK companies as well as Indian companies. So I think we're on the start of the FTA. It's a new departure. I think it should be part of the post-COVID growth story for both countries. That's not always straightforward. Politics can very much go the other way. So what it needs, you'll be one of them, but others on this call are kind of advocates who are both pitching in on the UK side and making the case for why, in the end, this is going to be good news in a post-COVID recovery for both economies.
Thank you. Well, we are staying on the topic of FTA. I wear a lot of hats, and that kind of also makes me talk to a lot of businesses. One of the sectors, and I know you must have your key areas of focus, which I will ask you on FTA shortly. Since I have your attention, I'd like to kind of bring to you the textile sector in India. So textile sector apparently, doesn't have the same privileges India like countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. And they've been kind of trying to see if there could be a policy change which allows more free trade between the UK and India in this particular sector. And I also understand Scotland particularly is doing quite a lot of things in this particular industry with India. I know that University of Edinburgh has a few projects on the go with various Indian universities and research institutes where they are collaborating in this particular sector, talking about, cotton, textile, new smart textile, new technology. So I think that is something that I'd like you to keep in your points to see, is there more that can be done for this particular sector? But other than that, are there any key areas of focus when it comes to FTA between the UK and India?
On textiles, duly noted, I would say that Of course, that what you're referring to links a bit to the review which the British government's doing of the generalised system of preferences, preferential trade arrangements it has with certain countries around the world. And I'm not sure if there's a public consultation on that, but I would certainly be feeding.
Apologies for the interruption, Alex. Would you mind just repeating the beginning to that answer? There was a bit of breakup just there.
Okay. In the textile sector, you may be referring to the review of the generalised system of preferences, which is the policy scheme, which gives certain tariff preferences to some countries around the world. And if there's a public consultation, I'd be firing into that. If I was a textile manufacturer in Scotland. And in terms of, I mean, we want a very priority sectors. We want a very broad FTA. There are some obvious asks on Scotch whisky tariffs, for example, which are very, very high coming into India, which they could be lowered to benefit of everybody. I'm sure we'll want it broad. I'm sure we wanted it to include a data chapter, because I think the flow of data between the two jurisdictions is going to be fundamental to the development of growth in those two areas. Financial services, very big, important industry to Scotland. It's something which we talk about every day with the Indian government. We think, again, there's a lot of potential for growth in that area in India, and sharing India with the UK. I'm sure, perhaps partly linked to data, we'll always want to encourage greater flow of trade and ideas in technology. And that's obviously sometimes linked to research when you're thinking about frontier technology. So anything which encourages that, I think, would be welcome. But it will be broad, yeah? I mean, it should be a broad FTA. And what I think we have to do is look along the way about which of the different sectors which we can already begin to liberalise in, even before we get to the FTA. There'll be some very tough things to negotiate as you get towards an end game. But I hope there is there are things we can do along the way.
Thank you. So continuing, Rick, do you want me to continue with my question?
Yeah, please, if you have another question, go ahead. I can jump in straight after. Thank you.
Just another quick one, I guess. There is a lot of talk about K-shaped recovery. How do you see any risk of that recovery in India? And that's the question.
Yes, I had to ask somebody. I think I know what a K-shaped recovery is, where basically one part of the economy is growing rather nicely, and another part of the economy is declining. I think there is a risk of that. Yes, I looked at some work done by development economists about the effect of COVID on India, not just India actually, but it's certainly true in India that the lowest percentiles of income are hit the hardest by a pandemic. I'm sure that's true in the UK as well. And the degree of roughly 85% of people who work in India work informally, astonishing numbers, and they have been the hardest hit by the pandemic, in a sense. They're very often not able to work remotely. They've had to go back to villages very often. So that, I think, has had a big impact on that sector. The pandemic has had a big impact on that sector. You see other parts of the economy doing very well. You look at the numbers from Tata Consultancy Services about the number of people they're looking to employ in the UK and around the world. It's astonishing. Some of those sectors are growing very, very fast. As the COVID has pushed us all, as we are today, online. So yes, I do see a risk of that actually. And that is a big policy challenge actually for the Indian government, which they're grappling with, is how do you support those who are most vulnerable to get them back into employment and to getting decent incomes. And that's partly about the fairly fundamental reforms which help to get the economy to grow. So yes, I fear there is a risk of it.
Thank you for the responses. Perhaps now I'd like to kind of take a step back and take a slightly broader approach. Very keen to understand to what extent this new partnership represents the UK's trade policy for Global Britain, the Global Britain vision, and what the implications are for UK's trade with the rest of Asia following from this.
It absolutely does represent the vision of Global Britain. And my last job, actually, what I was really doing was writing with John Bew the integrated review, which was published finally in March after I had arrived here. And we spent about a year working on that. And the the shift to Asia, if I go back to Amal Rajan's kind of 3 big changes in the world at the beginning, the shift to Asia, Indo-Pacific, whatever you want to call it, is fundamentally part of that. And a free trade agreement with India is one of the ways you express that. I would say, Rick, and I'll keep referring to integrated review out of personal pride, if nothing else. It's also, our relationship with India is also a test of something which I think is going to be very important to the UK's international policy, which is to be a comprehensive national power. That's an expression which Xi Jinping used soon after he came to power in China. In other words, we have to use all these different levers in order to achieve our effects. And Poonam was asking, I think, at the start, a bit earlier about Scotland, and it's not just about trade or about investment. It's also about education. It's about migration. It's about research. It's about defence. And you kind of got to wrap all of that up together. So when I talk about those 5 strands, you have to think how you're actually going to use them together in order to achieve your effect. I wouldn't say that trading with India is to the exclusion of other parts of the world. Asia certainly far from it. I mean, I think if the foreign secretary was sitting here, he would be saying, no, this is part of an overall push towards the Pacific, and it's I think the lead official negotiating the India FTA is also in negotiating CPTPP. So you do have a sense of an overall approach to Asia. So I think it's very much part in the new kind of relationship we see with India is very much part of an overall approach towards the Indo-Pacific.
I think taking that a step further, we'll talk about some of the politics and diplomacy implications with a view to UK-India relations and the rest of the world. Could you summarize a little bit the implications, objectives, and key areas related to the increase in political dialogue between India and the UK on bilateral, regional, and global issues, focusing on the Commonwealth countries in Africa, CARICOM, and the Pacific Island states?
Sure. I mean, I think, at the heart, we're trying to transform the UK-India relationship, but that doesn't sit in a kind of isolation. That's also part of, sometimes we're looking beyond our own 2 countries. For example, we're considering how we might make development instruments. We've done a pilot project already where the UK and India partner together to place innovation in some other countries, particularly in East Africa. We actually run a pilot on that, which is quite interesting about how you can do that. Because India is a fantastic source of what they would call frugal innovation. We work together in the UN. India's got its presidency of the UN Security Council. It's on the Security Council now for a couple of years. Next month, it holds the presidency, and we're working together on maritime security, which is something which I think they're going to introduce some thinking on. The other day, actually, we were working together in the UN Human Rights Council on education for girls, if I'm not mistaken, resolution on that. So we try to work more on the multilateral bodies. Of course, we look to cooperate in the Commonwealth itself. One of the elements, I should say, in the text of the COP, in the Glasgow COP on climate change, is working with India and small island states about resilient infrastructure. India has a lot of very interesting experience for the last 20 years about how it makes your infrastructure climate resilient. The real success story of India has been to reduce the harm caused by dramatic weather events, particularly in the Bay of Bengal. And that is learning which we're trying to then take, or knowledge we're trying to take lessons to other parts of the Indo-Pacific, and particularly to small island states. So I think the UK-India relationship should be about, obviously, a bilateral relationship, but actually it's about the extension of that into multilateral fora, or whether it's into smaller fora. Of course, the Prime Minister Modi was at the G7 last month in Cornwall, and also into kind of cooperation with other states. Some events come up which actually force us into this. And a good example, which Roddy was mentioning, was Afghanistan. India has huge interest in Afghanistan. It's very much part of the region, and the UK does as well, but not in the same geographical way. And so actually trying to work with India on Afghanistan will be one of our priorities for the next year or two.
Perhaps in a similar vein, you could comment a little bit on the UK's role in the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the IORA framework. and what the UK's role within that will be.
Yeah, Rick, I'll try and go wider than just the Rim Association. I mean, there are a whole lot of associations in the Indian Ocean. I mean, fundamentally, I was reminded soon after I arrived in India that historically, and this is going back a while, the Bombay presidency included Yemen, Aden as was. In other words, the kind of concept, the strategic concept of India has always had an Indian Ocean part to it, and indeed a Middle East and East African link to it. And that's true whether through flows of migration, particularly from Gujarat from the end of the 19th century. You know, it's a sense of this is a very, you have a land, but you have the sea and you have the land on the other side. So we are creating basically with India an India-Ocean partnership, which is maritime at its core, about the understanding of the sea and what's happening in that part of the world, but also has a land and an air element to it. And you'll see that the Carrier Strike Group, which is coming, as I say, coming into Indian waters, will be the embodiment of that. We have a lot of exercises we're running with the Indian, as our maritime awareness is increasing, professional training. It's a whole series of things which are basically about how do we and India together on the defense side begin to understand that region better. And that includes, as I say, elements of the Middle East and elements of East Africa as well.
And that brings us quite nicely onto the DISP, the Defence and International Security Partnership. It was agreed in 2015 between the UK and India. And so I understand that there's going to be a renewed focus on this.
Yeah.
Moving forward,
yeah.
If you could describe that a little
bit.
That's
right, Rick. I mean, so 2015, I mean, that's a lifetime ago. So much has happened. So we are really trying to transform that defense and security relationship. I mentioned the Indian Ocean Partnership is one part of that. I would say joint exercising more generally is the second part of it, where we want to do a lot more together in all three of the services. Professional military education, and also, and this is obviously hopefully of interest to any companies on the line, also in defense exports and investment. Now, the kind of old days in which you sold kit to another country and that was it, those days are probably coming to an end. Now you really have to have a different kind of partnership where you're transferring intellectual property, but at the same time trying to develop things together. It's a very strong drive in India for so self-reliance. But I think that's not kind of closing the border. It's actually trying to generate more indigenous industries, but with the help of other countries and other companies. And so we're talking a lot to BAE Systems, to Rolls-Royce, and hopefully to others about how we go about doing that. And I mentioned at the beginning, I think this is an area where we really need to transform our relationship. And I think that's a very important pillar of the new defense relationship.
I think no discussion of defense really can happen without a bit of understanding of the risks posed by environmental catastrophe. And so we could talk a little bit now about the climate and biodiversity. I understand there's a Green Growth Equity Fund and the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund between the UK and India. And what opportunities are there for the UK, Scotland, and what do these represent?
So I think first of all, I'll just take a step back. I think that quite a lot of our work here in the High Commission and across our network across India, which by the way is the biggest diplomatic network that the UK has of any country in the world. I mean, India is one of the biggest countries in the world, but nevertheless, it is very broad. We have offices, I think we have 10 or 11 offices, it's a lot. And I think that must be right in a country like India, where you have so much going on in different parts of the country, and it's so diverse. And so a lot of our work is around sustainability in one form or another. And that's everything from research. We do a lot of research together. I think the UK is India's second research partner, if I'm not mistaken, its top European research partner, through to policy, looking at the climate change discussion negotiations, which are going on at the moment, which will come to a climax in Glasgow in early November, through to companies. And the two are linked. Yeah, we've had some great success with some small projects which we ran on electric vehicles, which have led to big investments by UK companies in India, for example, on electric buses. And I see a potential for a lot more in that area. The funds you refer to are then part of our development spend in India. So we spend development money in India, but we don't do it in a traditional way. We invest it into funds, which we co-invest with the Indian government into funds which take equity positions in innovative companies. And the companies in India are amazing. So, you know, they're extraordinary. I have met some of them doing very clever things. For example, about using agricultural waste for power, transforming land use, big issue in India. How do you refresh degraded land? A big issue for all countries, but in India it certainly is. So you know, be one of those companies. You know, be on either side of that deal. Either co-join those funds. So, for example, BP have now put quite a lot of money into about 70 million quid into one of those funds because it sees potential from doing it as it tries to achieve its commercial and social aims. Or you know, be on the other side of it in terms of companies which are innovative companies which are using those funds and then growing out of them actually as they get successful. And I'm glad you asked it actually, Rick, because that is, I think, the future of development spend in India is more and more about capital going into to essentially make certain sectors of the economy in certain regions of India more investable. You know, success over time is that you don't need public funds going into these areas, but at the moment you do in some areas. But they are attracting very dynamic entrepreneurs, these funds, who are then looking at ways to then grow out of them.
I'm looking forward to more private entrepreneurs moving in both directions in this field. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities and plenty to build on COP26 in Glasgow this year. Just bringing it back actually with a question from the audience, back to the security topic. William Knight asks, would the UK consider applying to join the Quad? And how likely is it that India would react positively?
Thanks, William. The Quad is a construct of obviously of Japan, Australia, United States, and India, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed, mainly according to the attitudes which each of those four members have taken towards China. And I think Australia really put the Quad to one side for a while, and then it's come back much more strongly as Australia and Chinese relationships have changed quite a lot over the last decade. I think we can all get a bit obsessed about kind of institutional mechanisms. The UK obviously has very good relations with all four of those countries and is working. And if you look at the integrated review, it's really pushing a stronger relationship, not just with India, but with Australia and with Japan. Already has a very deep one with the United States. So I would expect to see with each of those countries a great deal more work. Also, and here I think France does as well, trilateral work with, say India and Australia on some issues. I see a lot of potential there. Whether it becomes part of the Quad, that's really up to the Quad members, I think. What matters is the effects we're trying to achieve, and that can be in lots of areas, certainly including security and defense, and also sort of the cusp point between security and defense and the economy, where you need to have greater trusted suppliers. And I think there's enormous opportunity for India as being a trusted supplier of technology into the UK and into other markets. That I think that one's going to run and run, in my view.
And that brings us actually quite nicely onto a question from Sunil Muralidhar Shastri. What can the UK do to enhance science and technology cooperation with India, especially in the area of environment, given the UK is no longer the beneficiary of future EU endeavours in these areas?
Yeah, I mean, as an aside, of course, there is actually, if I understand it right, the EU and the UK have reached an agreement on how it'll do research in the future. I mean, the UK obviously is a very attractive place for Indian research already. We do a great deal together. As I said, UK is India's biggest European research partner. We spend quite a lot of effort and money on supporting development research, particularly in areas of sustainability. I think there are indirect ways we can help. I would say that our migration policy, our visa policy, has a significant impact on our ability to do research well. And so I'm delighted that the government has introduced a new post-study work scheme, which is to work for a couple of years after you finish university, in 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, if you finish a PhD. So it should attract Indian talent to the UK. I also think that the relationship between companies is going to matter a lot here. A lot of the really interesting innovation research gets driven out of by companies, and it's great that if you look at the FDI statistics for the UK as a whole, India, I think, was second last year in terms of investment into the UK. And a lot of that investment is coming from innovative tech companies. It's really interesting that when I talked to them about a month or so ago, what they were really interested in is how they could thicken their relationships with universities. And actually, we're organising a roadshow for those companies with UK universities, exactly to show to them the sorts of, the potential collaboration which exists. I know universities all over the world are, all over the UK are involved with that. Strathclyde, I know, is we have a new relationship actually between Edinburgh and the Gujarat University, University in Biotechnology. So I think if you let humans and companies flow, quite a lot of innovation flows as well. And we can structure it a bit and we can support it university to university, but actually that's why, going back to the FTA, if you essentially make it easier for these things to move between the two countries, I think good things happen from that, including in innovation and research.
Excuse me, that leads on quite nicely to a question from Roger Jeffrey. I'll just ask this before bringing the discussion back to have a focus more on society and gender, which I'll invite Poonam to discuss. But first, Roger Jeffrey from Edinburgh, he says, it's quite a long question, excuse the length. In all this discussion, education, science and research has been given little attention. With the massive cut in ODA funding and the decision by the government of India not to accept ODA status, UK-India science collaborations are in a state of chaos, I quote. Scottish universities and colleges have been prominent in forging partnerships, often in climate science, medicine and public health, as well as technology. Much of this is under threat. Despite the significance of COP26, what will you do to provide a replacement supportive framework for education, science and research?
So you're right, you're of course absolutely right, Roger, that there have been cuts to the ODA budget from 0.7% to 0.5%, and that has had impacts, and including in the research area. I'm very aware of that. And that 0.5% is going to remain, I suspect, for most of the rest of this Parliament. So we have to look at it as it is. And of what remains in India, we do have ODA spend in India that is focused mainly on capital and on the funds which I mentioned earlier. And of course, those funds do have hopefully a significant contribution to sustainability. I think it's very important. I mean, so the first question is, how much can you do with less money? Can you, it was very interesting to me actually to look at the Edinburgh Gujarat biotechnology sign up, because that is not about public funds. That's essentially about a new Indian university seeing potential through working on a specific topic with a centre of excellence in the UK in Edinburgh. And I think you should see more opportunities for that kind of direct collaboration in different areas. I was talking to Cranfield University, I appreciate, in England recently about their relationships with security and defence with universities in Telangana. I would expect there to be more collaboration, direct collaboration between universities over the next 5 years. There really ought to be. I think what we can do, certainly from the High Commission, from the British Council, who are heavily involved in this, is to make the connections, to ensure that where there need to be kind of frameworks in place which enable, through federal favours, which enable those communications to take place, that we have those in place. But I don't want to pretend that it's going to be the same amounts of money, because there won't be. But I would hope that in the thickening of a relationship that we've been discussing over the last 45 minutes or so, that would enable some more increased collaboration to take place. So that would be my answer.
Yeah. So you mentioned also in some of UK India's bilateral relationship in terms of their coordination over some more international and global issues. You mentioned education for girls. So perhaps on this topic, I could bring Poonam in to pursue this angle a little further.
Well, if I talk about the Indian government, I see a lot of initiative by Indian government. They have rolled out several awareness campaigns, and not just awareness campaigns, but also financial aid to support girl education, to support gender equality in India. And I kind of agree with what Sir Alex Ellis G said earlier on regarding educational collaboration. I'm seeing that myself. I have had approach in last few years from multiple universities in Scotland who are very keen to work directly with universities in India and vice versa, where they want to take their research further. They want to, look at key areas where, technology can be utilized better in educational space, so both the countries can benefit. And I think, as much as we talk about budgets and everything, when institutions come forward to support and collaborate, we can also see some great partnerships like we are seeing with University of Edinburgh and Gujarat, for example. I'm quite aware of that. And also, I think there are some talks going on with Delhi University, with certain colleges and universities in Scotland too, as far as I'm aware. Those talks are happening. So I think that would kind of rest my answer there regarding girl education and initiatives in India as well.
I think it's interesting. Thanks, Poonam. And I think that so I think the best thing we can do, frankly, is to provide the framework within which those connections can thrive. And we have a pretty big increase in Indian students coming to the UK. There were a lot dropped off because of the ending of the post-study work visa route. Applications were up, I think, 50% last year from Indian students. So it's growing again very fast into UK universities. I should just flag the British Council actually does some work directly on gender advancements in higher education. There is a partnership, I was just reading here, between 6 UK higher education institutions and 30 ones in India, which are really about how you go about implementing gender advancement inside your institutions. And that's done with in partnership with the Department of Science and Technology here in India. So there is a direct kind of program about this. We also do a lot. There's a great work working on within the High Commission actually with Pledge for Progress, working with Indian firms. I think a lot of companies actually can be very dynamic in this area in terms of gender equality and empowerment. And a lot is going on there to try female leaders who are actually bringing on talent in India. So there's no doubt a lot more to do, but I think it's an area which we will keep pushing at.
Would you like to? Okay, yeah. I've got another question now from the audience from Tim Lancaster. This all sounds very good on strengthening UK-India relations. What implications does this have on UK relations with Pakistan, which remain really important in regard to maintaining a balance on India-Pakistan relations, and even more perhaps with regard to Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we have a close relationship with Pakistan for very good reasons. I don't see that having a good India-UK relationship is damaging to Pakistan or to the UK-Pakistan relationship. I'm for growth, and I think that. So I'm unapologetic here about the close, good relationship the UK has with Pakistan, but I think we just really need to transform our relationship with India, and there's a lot of work to do on that, frankly. There are lots of people-to-people contacts with India. Quite a lot. There's not as much trade as you'd expect, frankly, and there certainly isn't the defence and security relationship which you would expect. There's actually quite a lot of catching up to do, in my view, and that is not to denigrate the work of my predecessors who've done great work here. But this is, India is going to be one of the 3 defining countries of this century. And it already is to a large extent. But look at the COP. You're not going to solve climate change without India being part of that. It's in that category of country which you just can't solve the world's problems without India being part of the solution. So I do feel a strong sense that we have a lot of work to do to ground to make up. I think the question of Afghanistan is actually a very interesting and difficult one because it's, you know, the American withdrawal is going to have a big impact on Pakistan and a big impact on India. And there isn't a lot of trust between those two countries vis-a-vis Afghanistan. Indeed, they found themselves kind of on the other side from each other. And, you know, UK has a continuing interest in stability in Afghanistan. So one of the things we are doing is exactly trying to speak to both of those countries about what we could do. Of course, they're talking directly to each other in the context, in some international context. I think the Shanghai Cooperation Council, if I'm not mistaken, organization is meeting yesterday, I think. So you have to look at it around. But I do see a risk of the change in Afghanistan complicating the India-Pakistan relation. And of course, the UK holds close relationships with both. But I don't see, you know, I don't buy an argument that improving our relationship with India is going to harm our relationship with Pakistan. You know, we really have to push and work on both, but I really feel we have a lot of work to do on changing our relationship with India.
Absolutely. I think there's some questions focusing a little bit on what the UK, particularly Scotland, can do to attract more Indian students, given the status of Scottish universities in the world. The number of Indian students is relatively low. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about what the implications are for the Comprehensive Migration and Mobility Partnership with regards to this are, and how that will support.
Sure. Hopefully that won't do harm to Indian students, since it's aimed at it's essentially that mobility partnership is, and I should say, by the way, the Home Office has a huge interest in India in a lot of different areas, from counter-terrorism through to mobility and serious organised crime, where we want much more working together with India to tackle it. And the mobility partnership looks at three things, one of which is that immigration crime. Immigration crime is very often linked to kind of gangs and other kinds of criminality. So, and we try to work together much better about how to stop people traffickers. Secondly, it's about making legal migration easier between the two countries, including through the creation of a young professionals route, which is the first time we'll ever have done that with any visa country anywhere in the world. Numbers quite small to start with, about 3,000. We'll see how it goes. But then thirdly, facilitating, tackling illegal migration, overstayers on visas, people who shouldn't come into the UK in the first place. And those two or three things, they sit together really, and getting the balance right, where you enable legal migration and crack down on illegal migration. I think that I would hope that one of the consequences of the visa changes in visa policy in the UK, which have led to a significant increase in Indian student applications to the UK, will benefit Scotland, given the excellence of Scotland's universities. So I think that, and it's really interesting what Poonam was saying. Actually, I really would encourage the Scottish institutions to be looking harder at India, because I do think there's quite a lot of potential, and we should help. Yeah. To steer towards, because India is so big, where do you start? Where do you go? And and I would start specific, as Edinburgh, for example, have done with Gujarat, and particular subjects, and really try to develop from there. But I think there's a huge potential for greater collaboration in this area. And also, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but attract tourists. If you come to a country and you look at it and you like it, and I've been to Scotland for every single summer holiday since I was 0. So I have, there's not, my father rather, and he's English, he said with lament, he's 91, he missed 2 years between the ages of 2 and 4 where he didn't go to Scotland for his holiday. And my mother obviously was brought up for some time in Scotland. So, but I think getting people to go there and actually see it is very important. Because when people have seen something, and something is fantastic, basically, Scotland, I think that they will be inspired. I hope, for example, you hope that some of the people come over for the COP negotiation, when they have a moment to actually step outside of one of those smoke-filled rooms, actually look at the fantastic city of Glasgow, where my mother's family is from, and think, yes, this would be a great place to study. I also think faculty exchange is very important, because that's one of the ways in which you attract more educational flows. So I just think take the opportunity of this transformation in the UK-India relationship to actually find a Scottish element to it, which, whether it's about education, or particularly around education, actually, I think, because I think you have so much to offer, frankly, in that area.
Thank you very much. I mean, perhaps in the India-UK Together joint cultural exchange program might benefit this. Perhaps before we start to wrap up, you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, of course, one of the questions I'd like to ask all of you is, what's the best way for the UK? What's the right policy for the UK in India's 75th independence celebrations? My first instinct is, number one, it's India's celebration, not the UK's. So, you know, that's the thing for India to do. Secondly, you know, some of that's going to be some uncomfortable history for us, and I think we just have to roll with that. But thirdly, how do I use you guys to tell a story about the UK today, this relationship with India and the relationship with tomorrow? I think there's one fantastic historical legacy of UK, the Raj colonialism, which is all the talented people from India who are in the UK. So I'm going to just point to Poonam and say, you know, why is Poonam in Scotland? Why, you know, what took her there? You know, look what she's achieved. And the amazing stories of people and their success in the UK, I think is something which we should tell. We should tell that story much better, actually, about the UK and what the opportunities have been. So we're doing some stuff around cultural initiatives, which I think is a kind of safer space, and the British Council is leading on that, and includes the Scottish element, if I'm not mistaken, with Glasgow, for example. But I think we can do more to tell that human story in an interesting way. Now, of course, I can tell the story of my grandfather, but that's kind of looking to the past. I really want to describe the present and the future. You know, getting young scholars from India to the UK. And finally, we tend to talk very one way. I would quite like some people in the United Kingdom to understand India a little bit better. You know, everyone from outside India looks at it through all these different prisms of kind of, you know, the exotic India and the impoverished India and the sort of dramatic India. And India, you know, people are just getting on like everywhere else. And I think just some better understanding by people in the UK of the reality of India, I think would be a wonderful thing to achieve over the next decade.
Very nice note.
That's such a fantastic way to actually finish this off. And I completely agree with you. Some really good points raised by you there. Why am I in the UK? You know, why are we not telling our story? And those stories can obviously, I think, increase further collaboration, whether it's in research, whether it's in science, technology, innovation, and even other topics like health, gender equality, everything. So I completely agree with you. And we do, as Indian diaspora here, owes it to the country here too, you know, to tell our story better while we are celebrating Indian independence this year. So,
yeah, I mean, you know, it's so interesting to me that interview I referred to at the beginning between Sundar Pichai and Amar Rajan. That's Amar Rajan's one of the senior journalists in the BBC. And there he is talking to Sundar Pichai about, you know, having a fathers who are Tamils. And there's just something there which I think, you know, we could project more about both the achievement and the nature of the UK, and therefore that you get off some of the history. If you read my Twitter feed, quick plug for my Twitter feed, you know, whenever I do a video in Hindi, in fact, in any language, it comes back with, you know, Kohinoor is number one on the list, you know, what, give us back the diamond. And on the other night, I was perhaps unwisely tweeting, and I'm conflicted on sport. I'm an absolutely passionate Scotland fan for rugby. My grandfather played for Scotland, and I'm an English football fan. I tweeted on Sunday night, you know, I think we're going to need a bit of help here from all over the world to win this one. And, you know, you get quite a lot back saying, why the hell should we help you, you colonialist bastards, or words to those effects. And, you know, I wouldn't like to call Twitter the kind of, you know, the fount of all knowledge, but I just would like to move the conversation off that and onto something about today and tomorrow. And I taught history, I love history, but you know, I do think that there's so much, but we could tell the story so much better about today and tomorrow.
I'd like to say that, you know, one topic I'd quickly touch on is health. We've all seen, and India is one of the worst COVID second wave of pandemic that happened, you know, with this double mutation, lots of lives lost, huge oxygen crisis in India. So I'd like to, first of all, also say a big thank you to all the British community the British government, the Scottish government itself, who sent huge amount of aids to India, which was much needed in India at the time. And we as a company, I am, of course, that's where the background also comes in. All my family is actually in India, and I could hear the ground reality on daily basis, almost hourly basis, of what was happening in India. And we as a company decided to step in about 8-9 weeks ago and have sent over 5,000 oxygen concentrators all over India, out of which 500 of them were straight donations by us to multiple charitable organizations in India. And then some other companies came along and donated a vast amounts of face shields, hand sanitizers, masks, which we gladly then transported to India. So, that was our response to health crisis in India. And having helped India, we got approached by certain organizations to help in Nepal and other countries. And that's where our organization is working. And that's all part of our charitable work that we believe that, is part of giving back to the society and helping people wherever, whether it's in India or anywhere else in the world.
A very, very positive note to end on, and huge support in all directions, frankly. And perhaps I could pass over to Roddy to start to wrap proceedings up a little.
I will. Thank you very much, Alex. And you couldn't have epitomized better what our core mission is, which is to increase knowledge of Pan-Asia. And the idea 9 years ago, nearly 10 years ago, of starting the Institute was because there's hardly a family in Scotland where there wasn't some relation, sometimes 2 or 3 generations back, who, as well as going west, headed east and made a major impact in parts of Asia. And of course, quite close to you in Calcutta, the great botanical gardens there, which the Asia Scotland Trust is working to restore, were designed by Roxburgh, Scotsman. Subsequently, he was there and people before him. So there are many ways in which we can help improve the environmental lot of people in India. And of course, not every day you have an Indian Chancellor of the Exchequer, whose father-in-law, Narayana Murthy, was one of the founders of Infosys. So there are a lot of connections, and your sharing of your thoughts with us today have brought that all very much into focus. And working with your opposite number, if you like, the High Commissioner of India in London, who's been up and with whom we've had a lunch, has been very helpful as well. So we look forward to working with you and your team and bringing other thoughts on India to our followers in the coming months. And I want to thank you and Rick and Poonam for their participation on the panel. And greetings to a man from Magdalen. I was down the road at Trinity, but both well educated. The Pepys Library, you will remember, no doubt. But thank you, Alex, very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And please stay in touch and do participate in the consultations going on at the moment. And the ideas around how we do the 75th, I'm very interested in as well. So I think that's something which we have to do, not just as a government, but actually thinking about it in things like Asia Scotland. And I should just say, pay thanks to Poonam for the work she's done, particularly recently on the COVID side. That was a great thing. And I think it was really felt in India, the response which came from the UK, not just from the government, but from individuals and from companies to support India in its hour of need. I think people remember that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Very many thanks.
Thank you.
See you all soon.